Welcome along to all strange historians and Beatles fans. This time around, we're going to talk about the strange history of the Beatles song, I Am the Walrus. Before I begin, I want to thank some of my fellow strange historians and the strange AI stuff, all of whom helped me with some of this research that I'm going to be sharing with you. So sit back and pour yourself a cup of coffee, or a tankard of tea, or a mug of mead, or a chalice of cider, or a flagon filled with any beverage of your choice, and join your fellow strange historians and Beatles fans around the campfire. I Am the Walrus is a song by the Beatles. It was released in 1967 as a B-side to the single Hello Goodbye. The song was written by John Lennon with contributions from his friend Pete Shotton, who, by the way, never got any kind of co-writing credit for this or any of the other songs he contributed to. So I ask my fellow Beatles fans this: do you think that Pete should have gotten a co-writing credit, since another collaborator of John Lennon's kind of set a precedent for that, right? You know, throwing out a line or two apparently earns you co-writing credit on a song. So you let me know what you think about that. I'd be very interested to know. The song is known for its surreal and nonsensical lyrics, as well as its complex musical structure and use of unusual instruments and sound effects. I Am the Walrus has become one of the Beatles' most iconic and beloved songs, and has been covered by a wide range of artists over the years. So let's talk about all those who were involved with it. So you got John Lennon. He did the lead vocals, he played the electric piano and the mellotron. And Paul McCartney, he played the bass guitar and tambourine. And you of course had George Harrison, who played electric guitar, and Ringo Starr played the drums. Now, the song was orchestrated, directed, and produced by George Martin. And of course you already know that I mentioned Pete Shotton contributed to the lyrics. There are also session musicians. You had strings, you had brass, and you had woodwinds. You also had the Mike Sammis Singers, which included Mike Sammis, John O'Neill, Irene King, Enid Hurd, Mike Redway, Ross Gilmore, Valerie Bain, Marion Gaye, and Mel Todd. They did the backing vocals. You also had Ray Thomas doing backing vocals, and you had Mike Pinder doing backing vocals, and the song was engineered by Jeff Emmerich and Ken Scott. The title of the song comes from The Walrus and the Carpenter, which is a narrative poem by Lewis Carroll that appears in his book Through the Looking Glass, which was published in December of 1871. Now let's talk about the inspiration and the writing of the song. In many ways, the inspiration for I Am the Walrus is somewhat difficult to pin down, and the reason why is because the lyrics actually came from 3 different song ideas that John Lennon had been working on. He was trying to write something, for example, that matched the sound of a police siren that he heard at his home in Weybridge. So that was the first one. And so you've got the lines, Mr. City, policeman sitting. And that was actually written to the rhythm and the melody of the police siren. The second idea was a short rhyme that John Lennon had wrote while sitting in his garden, about sitting in a garden. So, and that line was, sitting in an English garden, waiting for the sun. And the third was a nonsense phrase that was, sitting on a cornflake, waiting for the man to come. And the word man would later be changed to van, but we're going to talk about that in a bit. And some have suggested that a good portion of the lyrics of the song were inspired by the work of the great Lewis Carroll, particularly his poem, The Walrus and the Carpenter, from Through the Looking Glass. And the reason that's suggested is because, well, that's what John Lennon said, but either way, that's for as far as the title, but even some of the lyrics as well, because John Lennon was a big fan of Lewis Carroll. And others have pointed to the influence of psychedelic drugs, which were becoming increasingly popular in the mid and late 1960s, and the song's surreal and nonsensical lyrics certainly reflect this sort of influence. Now, as was done with other songs that John Lennon had started to write, but for whatever reason never finished, he just went ahead and grabbed bits and pieces of them, and he would combine them into one song. And it was while working on this particular song, and a series of songs really, that his lifelong friend Pete Shotton was visiting him. And they were going through the mail, and John Lennon had received a letter from a student at his former school, actually their former school, which was Quarry Bank High School for boys. And so the student said that in his literature class, right there at the Quarry Bank High School for boys, they were actually analyzing the Beatles songs. So John and Pete thought this was really funny, right? They were amused by it. And so John said, well, look, I'm going to go ahead and finish the song in such a way that it would be maybe beyond analysis, and it would just confuse anyone who tried to interpret it. Now, John Lennon wasn't always honest about the inspiration and writing of his songs, and he may not have meant that. See, John Lennon was kind of intellectual. I mean, right, he's very well read. He also used a lot of slang, and he always had at his disposal lots of esoteric references, right? They're all in his vocabulary. John Lennon could write nonsense as well as anyone else, but nonsense doesn't necessarily mean it's meaningless. Just like in the case of Lewis Carroll's prose and poetry, there really can be deep meaning everywhere, if you just look for it. Also, just because John Lennon may have thought that his song was nonsense and didn't mean anything, doesn't mean that was really the case. Because you take, for example, how I often talk about mythic storytelling templates, right, and story structure. So, as an example of what I mean, it's kind of like how I always talk about The Wizard of Oz, and I always talk about The Wizard of Oz because, I mean, let's be honest, everybody knows it, but how the story follows a mythic storytelling structure. So you've got the allies, you've got the enemies, you've got the shapeshifters, you've got the threshold guardians, you've got the herald, right? You've got the tornado and what that symbolizes. It doesn't mean that L. Frank Baum meant all of that stuff to be in there. It doesn't mean that he was sitting there saying, here's the allies, and here's this, and here's that. But the fact of the matter is, storytelling is so deeply embedded into us that we almost can't help but have that sort of structure in our mind when we tell a story with Act 1 and Act 2 and Act 3. And so the same thing with John Lennon. Just because he specifically didn't mean a certain word to mean something doesn't mean that it doesn't have some sort of symbolic meaning, right? Even if it's not just for him, it doesn't mean that it doesn't have a symbolic meaning to somebody else. And also, let's not forget about subconscious influence. There are things that people write and create all the time, and they don't realize where it all may have come from. And so John Lennon said to Pete, hey, what was that playground nursery rhyme that we used to sing as children? And Pete said, oh, you mean this? Yellow matter custard, green slop pie, all mixed together with a dead dog's eye. Slap it on a buddy, 10 foot thick, then wash it all down with a cup of cold sick. And, of course, John and Pete started laughing, like, yeah, that's it. And so John liberated some lyrics from that. And then Pete also suggested that John Lennon change the phrase, waiting for the man to come, to waiting for the van to come. And we're going to talk about why that was in a little while. And supposedly upon finishing the lyrics, John turned to Pete and said, let the Yeffers work that one out. Now, a lot of Beatles fans grab onto that as proof that John Lennon didn't mean anything by the song, that it means nothing, and so let the Yeffers work that out. But saying that also can mean, hey, this is so complicated, this is so deeply immersed within my subconscious, that there's no way they're going to be able to figure this out. And so it could go either way. And so once again, just because John Lennon said that the song has no meaning doesn't mean it doesn't. Perhaps subconsciously, John Lennon himself didn't realize how much meaning was infused within his own lyrics. Remember, John Lennon went to primal scream therapy, and it was then that he realized how much of his writing, of his creativity, came from something deep within his memories, deep within his subconscious. And so I believe that there's a great deal to analyze in the lyrics of this song. Just because John Lennon at the time didn't realize it doesn't mean it wasn't there. Because he would talk about songs that he wrote years and years and years later. He would say things like, with the song How Do You Sleep? And he said when he wrote it, it was about Paul. But then years later, he realized it was about himself. Now let's talk about the song structure. Okay, beginning with the introduction. So the song opens with a haunting string section and a choral introduction, which sets the tone for the surreal and otherworldly journey that the listener is about to embark upon. And so you got first one, right? The first verse begins with the iconic line, I am he, as you are he, as you are me, and we are all together, which establishes the theme of interconnectedness and unity. Now, this is where we're getting kind of interesting here, right? Because remember, John Lennon thinks, oh, it's nonsense, it doesn't mean anything, it just came out of nowhere. Not really. Not really. You see, that line seems to have come from the song Marching to Pretoria, which contains the following lyrics. So you've got, I'm with you as you're with me, and we are all together. And also, sing with me, I'll sing with you, and so we will sing together. It also has the line, walk with me, I'll walk with you, and so we will walk together. And also, dance with me, I'll dance with you, and so we will dance together. John Lennon denied this. He's like, nah, it's got nothing to do with that. It came from nowhere. It came from nothing. What do you think? Could that have been an example of subconscious plagiarism? Which, by the way, is not an insult. Okay? We all have it. We all deal with that. We don't know sometimes where ideas come from. When Paul McCartney wrote the song Yesterday, he didn't want to release it right away. He's like, wait a minute, this song, it's got to be another song, because it just sort of came to him. And so John Lennon used to say the same thing. It's like these songs just came out of the blue. The fact of the matter is, this was a legendary song, especially for the British, right? This was something that the British Army would sing. And so the idea that John Lennon never heard these lines before, didn't know the song, kind of slim. Anyway, that's followed by a series of nonsensical and bizarre images, which include, see how they run, like pigs from a gun. See how they fly. So what does that mean? Well, this line may be referring to how difficult it is to make friends, right? And especially for somebody like John Lennon, and how many will run as soon as maybe there's any sign of trouble or things aren't going the way they want them to, right? Any kind of sense of chaos, right? So you got pigs running from a gun, right? The sound of the gun, and it's like people are starting to scatter from John Lennon's life, which was a thing, right? Because he was considered, as more and more time went by and he's doing drugs, right, that people are finding it more and more difficult to communicate with him and be friendly with him. And then, of course, John Lennon says, I'm crying, because this, of course, made John Lennon sad. Then you got the line, sitting on a cornflake, waiting for the van to come. Now, people have listened to that song for, whatever, half a century or so at this point, and they're like, it doesn't mean anything, it's nonsense. Well, you think so? Well, I think, and I think others can agree, that it can be interpreted as people feeling small and insignificant in the world, right? You're sitting on a cornflake. Somebody who's large, somebody who's big, somebody who's heavy, somebody who's, important, isn't going to be sitting on a cornflake, right? But if you feel small, if you feel insignificant, right? You're as small as a cornflake, right? You're barely anything. You don't mean anything. You're just a flake in a bowl, flake in a box. However, it could also be a sexual allegory, especially when one considers that the line was originally man and not van, right? So originally it was waiting for the man to come, right? It's a little sexual, right? And at the time, the Beatles weren't really comfortable being able to write a line like that, because it's like, well, you still got your image, right? And so check this out. Dr. John Kellogg, he's the guy who invented cornflakes. He believed that sweet or spicy foods inflamed the passions. And so he sought to depress the libido with a bland, sugarless cereal that no one could possibly find arousing. John Lennon loved watching TV. A lot of you know that. He loved watching commercials. And so he obviously knew a lot about cornflakes. I know it sounds weird, but okay. He knew they existed. And John Lennon likely knew the theory that cornflakes were developed as a sort of anti-masturbatory morning meal. And so then his original line, sitting on a cornflake, waiting for the man to come, would make perfect sense. The next lines are, Corporation T-shirt, stupid bloody Tuesday, man you've been a naughty boy, you let your face grow long. Corporation T-shirt suggests that way too many people find their identities in large corporations and organizations. And just to give you an example of that, I mean, think about how addicted some people are to watching the news. Think about, like in the United States, for example, you've got these trials. And so people are joining these large communities online with, let's just say, hating somebody. And it's like, okay, we're going to hate this guy. We're part of this, okay? And then people are going on Twitter, and it's becoming like an echo chamber. And all they're doing is, yes, this person sucks. That person's horrible. That person should be fired. We hate this. We hate that, right? And so that's fine. People feel like they're part of something, but what they do is they lose their own identity, right? So it's because how they think doesn't matter so much anymore. Okay? They're just part of the crowd. They're not thinking for themselves. It's like, okay, this is the person we're going to hate now, and then 6 weeks later, oh, this is the new person we hate, and then 6 weeks later, oh, this is the new person we hate. And so they watch people, they listen to people, and they're like, okay, what's next? What's next? Who's the next target? And so I think that's what Corporation T-shirts suggests, that people find their identities in large corporations and large organizations and jumping on trends. Like I said, John Lennon watched TV a lot, especially commercials, and he saw the way marketing campaigns tried to brainwash people into buying their products by having them think that they are part of something bigger than themselves. Oh yes, we all drink Coke. Oh, we all drink Pepsi. Oh, we all hate, Amber Heard. Oh, we all do this. Oh, we all do that. And so I think that's what John Lennon was suggesting, and whether he did or didn't mean that, it turns out to be true. Now, Stupid Bloody Tuesday can be a reference to being insignificant when part of a bigger group, like I was just saying. So, for example, with 7 days, what does Tuesday matter? Who thinks about Tuesday, right? And so that's how people are. Most people are just kind of in the crowd, and they don't really stand out, just like a Tuesday. You're just another day in the week. The final part may be suggesting that people should be happy, and only bad people allow life to beat them down and make them unhappy. Then you get to the chorus, I am the Eggman. So that's been interpreted as referring to Humpty Dumpty, but it could also be a symbol of somebody who publicly, or maybe privately, cracks, right? They're just cracking apart, and nobody knows how to fix them. However, it could also be a reference to Eric Burdon. He was an English singer-songwriter, still is, right? Still alive, as of the day of this recording. And he was the lead vocalist at the time of The Animals, and he and John Lennon were good friends. And so what was kind of unusual is that Eric used to crack raw eggs over the bodies of naked women while he was having sex with them. Yeah, you heard that right. Eric used to have sex with women, and while doing that, while he was having sex with them, he would crack raw eggs over, I guess, their head, their face, and all over their bodies. On a side note, if any of the ladies listening to me right now, if you've ever had that done to you, will you kindly let me know in the comments below? I think we would all find that quite fascinating. And then the next line is, they are the Eggmen. And this lyric may be referring to the fact that nobody could really help them, the Beatles, right, if they fall apart. Because nobody understands them. Nobody knows how to fix them. Nobody knows how to relate to them and piece them together now that Brian Epstein, their manager, was gone. And then the next line is, I am the Walrus. Now when John says this, it may mean that you see him one way, right, because he just said, I am the Eggman, and then he says, I am the Walrus, right? So which one is he? And so you may think he's one way, he may think he's somebody else, but you really don't know him at all. And even he sometimes doesn't have a grasp on his own identity. John then sings Goo Goo Gajoob. Now, I don't know why, but some people seem to think that that line is Cuckoo Cachoo, which it's not. It's not even close. It's Goo Goo Gajoob. Now, of course, that could be interpreted in a number of ways. A lot of people think it's kind of mysterious, right? It's an enigmatic element of the song. But John Lennon, it seems pretty obvious, and he might not even have known this, right? Because I don't think he ever admitted to this. But we do know that he read James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake, or at least tried to, right? Because he had mentioned that in at least one interview. And in Finnegan's Wake, there is that term that's goo goo gooshed. Okay? Goo goo gooshed. Googoogoosth. So John Lennon either consciously or subconsciously remembered that from Finnegan's Wake. He may have remembered it incorrectly, just like he would later say with the walrus and the carpenter that he really should have said the carpenter, but we'll talk about that in a little while. So then you get the next verse, right, which continues the theme of confusion and disillusionment with the same repeated lines from the first verse and a similar melody. And so you've got the Mr. City, policeman sitting. So remember, the song's basic rhythm was actually inspired by a police siren. John heard an oscillating siren blaring in his neighborhood, and so this beat served as the basic beat for the entire song. And then you've got the line, pretty little policemen in a row. Now this may be referring to the fact that policemen, just like we were saying before with corporation T-shirts, right? They are kind of like the same way. Policemen are obedient public servants, and like those working in any large organization, they cannot and do not think independently, right? They can't. And it's like being in the military. It's like, no, we have to think as a unit. And so you've got that. And so when he says pretty little policemen in a row, right? It's kind of like looking at marzipan pigeons, right? And so you've just got them all lined up, and which is how people are, right? People are sheeple. And so he's making the same comment here in reference to police. Then the next line is, see how they fly like Lucy in the sky, see how they run. There's a lot to interpret with that, but I think we could all agree that this is most certainly a reference to John Lennon's song, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. And then he says, I'm crying, I'm crying, I'm crying, I'm crying. Of course, because John is crying because he's sad about all the things that he's recognizing and seeing all around him. About how his world isn't filled, or the world isn't filled with free thinkers, right? It's a lot of people that just sort of go with the flow. And then the song continues with yellow matter custard dripping from a dead dog's eye. And so, as I previously said, these lines were liberated from the nursery rhyme that includes the lines yellow matter custard, green slop pie, all mixed together with a dead dog's eye. Lennon then sings Crabalocker fishwife, pornographic priestess. So Crabalocker is a nonsense word. If anybody disagrees with that, if the word Crabalocker, at least in the 1960s, was used for something, I'm not aware of it, but if you do know, please let me know. A fishwife is typically the wife of a fisherman, selling her husband's catch. Now, pornographic priestess refers to how people aren't always what they appear to be, and are oftentimes the exact opposite of what you think they are. Those people, in mythic storytelling, are shapeshifters. And then the next line is, boy, you've been a naughty girl, you let your knickers down. In British English, knickers are panties, and so this suggests that some people eventually show their true colors. And so you can see how that line obviously fits in quite well with pornographic priestess. And then the lyrics continue with, I am the Eggman, they are the Eggmen, I am the Walrus, Goo Goo Gajoob. You then have an interlude. Okay, so the song moves into an instrumental section featuring a brass section and various sound effects, including a police siren, which adds to this feeling of chaos and disorientation. And then you've got the next verse, which introduces a new melody and structure with the lines, sitting in an English garden, waiting for the sun. Now these lyrics refer to John's garden in his Weybridge home, where he was living with his first wife, Cynthia. He was waiting for happiness to come over the horizon, right? John Lennon was famously unhappy well, at least, towards the end of the marriage with his wife Cynthia, and he was just waiting and waiting for something to come into his life. And so waiting for the son isn't a nonsense line at all. It was John Lennon waiting for something, waiting for happiness, waiting for some kind of warmth to come into his life. And then you got the next line, if the sun don't come, you get a tan from standing in the English rain. These lyrics kind of suggest a sense of futility, right? And resignation, because John Lennon is waiting for something that may never come. And so he finds himself settling for something less, right? And by the way, none of this is belittling to Cynthia, who, by all accounts, was a lovely lady, brilliant lady, great friend, great inspiration, great mom, right, to Julian. But John Lennon was a complex character, as we all know. And so John Lennon was unhappy in his marriage, and he assumed, at least at that time, that he just needed to settle for what life gave to him, since true love and happiness at that time in his life he felt would never come. And then the lyrics continue with, I am the Eggman, and then you hear, and we're going to talk about this in a bit, you hear the lines, now good sir. And then you hear the line, they are the Eggmen, and then in the background you hear, a poor man made tame to fortune's blows. And then you've got the line, I am the walrus, and then you've got goo goo gajoob, goo 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 gajoob, and then you hear the line, and this isn't John Lennon, it's not Paul McCartney, but early on in your life, when you first hear the song, you think, well, it's got to be one of them. Maybe it's Ringo, maybe it's somebody. And so you hear the line, good pity. And then, of course, you got the chorus, right? So the chorus is repeated once again. It reinforces the mysterious and elusive nature of the goo goo gajoob phrase. And then you've got expert texpert choking smokers. Don't you think the Joker laughs at you? And then you hear laughing, right? You hear ho ho ho, hee hee hee, ha ha ha, right? Now, those lines may be in reference to all the intellectuals, right? All these authority figures who Lennon always really despised. And, throughout his life, they kind of thought he was a loser, thought he was a joker, he wasn't going anywhere, right? And they all thought they were better than him, and he was just going to be a nothing. And so now, those intellectuals, those authority figures, are all looking up to John Lennon, right? They're all trying to interpret his song lyrics. They're trying to figure him out. And so in this, John Lennon is the joker. He's always been accused of being a joker. He was always, by his own admission, he was a class clown, right? And now he is laughing at them, right? So this line may as well have been, I'm laughing at all the intellectuals. I'm laughing at all the authority figures who thought I was nothing, who discounted me, who thought I wasn't going anywhere. And now I'm the big one on the hill, right? I'm the one they're trying to figure out. So the next line is, see how they smile like pigs in a sty, see how they snide. I'm crying, right? So you got the word snide. And so same kind of thing, right? And so, see how they smile like pigs in a sty, see how they snide. And so that could just as easily have been the interpretation I gave for the previous lines. Same with that. And then of course you have I'm crying, because he's not happy about it, right? Given a choice, I'm sure John Lennon would have preferred being appreciated and being noticed when he was younger. But that's just not something that ever happened. And then you've got the line, Semolina Pilchard. Now, according to Pattie Boyd, and the great Pattie Boyd, by the way, lovely lady, and she was married to George Harrison and Eric Clapton, a real angel. But she said the words Semolina Pilchard refer to Sergeant Pilcher of the London Drug Squad. See, that guy, he waged a campaign against British rock stars and underground figures during the late 1960s, including John Lennon. And so it seems like, a little bit of wordplay there. For example, a pilchard can be defined as one of various small marine fishes relating to a herring. It's a, commercially edible species of fish. And so it would make sense that John Lennon would refer to Sergeant Pilcher as a pilchard in order to belittle him, right? In order to belittle him. And honestly, he's just like all the others. He's just part of a big organization. He's just a policeman in a row. He doesn't mean anything to anybody. He's trying to break out of that, right? by doing these drug busts. Because he doesn't want to just be another insignificant police officer who comes and goes and nobody even knows who they are. And so that brings us to the line, climbing up the Eiffel Tower. So this seems to refer to Sergeant Pilcher trying to climb to the top and win some recognition in his field of law enforcement, right? By taking down celebrities in drug busts. And so people think, oh, it doesn't mean anything. Oh, it's just John Lennon, Semolina Pilcher climbing up the Eiffel Tower. It's just imagery. It means nothing. No, it doesn't. He's talking about this cop who is trying to make a name for himself. He's trying to climb to the top, for whatever reason, for fame, for, his own ambition. And then you've got Elementary Penguin singing Hare Krishna. And so John Lennon actually explained what this is, and I'll talk about that in a bit. I think I've got his quote here. And so the Elementary Penguin was used by John as a jab at those who go around chanting Hare Krishna or putting all their faith in one idol. John even admitted that he had poet Allen Ginsberg in mind when he wrote the lyric. Some people think that this also could have been a sly dig at George Harrison, though I don't think George Harrison ever took it that way, if that was the case. But either way, it seems like for the most part, we keep seeing this theme over and over and over again about how John Lennon is different from everybody else. And so many people are just conforming to the corporations, to the organization, to the groupthink that's all around them. The next line is, man, you should have seen them kicking Edgar Allan Poe. This could have been a reference to all the pseudo-intellectuals who think they're better than other people, right? John Lennon could have seen himself as a modern-day Edgar Allan Poe, right? As a misunderstood poet, clearly a genius, right? Clearly. But a misunderstood poet with dark inclinations, fine, who was not accepted by the educated class, right? Just sort of an outcast. And so you see this theme also throughout John Lennon's life. You see the types of people that he could relate to, right? Which was like a Dali or a Van Gogh or Edgar Allan Poe or Lewis Carroll, right? He always saw himself as someone on the outside looking in, and history has never treated people who are different very well, right? People like to be in their cliques, and people that are outside of the cliques, well, those are the weird ones. Those are the ones who should be shunned. It's kind of sad in a way, right? Because it seems like the people that are thinking different are really the ones that should be embraced, but that's just not the way it is. And so, yeah, you can see John Lennon, when he's talking about kicking Edgar Allan Poe, he could be saying, man, you should have seen them the way they're kicking John Lennon. You should see the way these pseudo-intellectuals, right? These people that think they're better than everybody else, just see the way they insult me. They just don't understand me, right? So that's what John Lennon, I think, was thinking with that line. Or maybe, like I said, could have been subconscious, deep down within himself. That is how John Lennon always felt. And he just had this great way of expressing himself, with these fantastic lyrics. And so he's able to talk about his life, like write a biography, right? A lot of his songs are biographies without anybody necessarily knowing it. Like with the song Help, and we'll talk about that another time, people hear the song Help, and they think, oh, it's a fun little rocker. And it sure sounds like one. But if you really pay attention to the lyrics, oh boy, that's a cry for help. So then you got the outro. So the song ends with a final instrumental section, which features a fade out of the goo-goo gajoob phrase and a final chord progression. It leaves the listener with a sense of unresolved tension and ambiguity. And so you got, I am the Eggman, they are the Eggmen, I am the Walrus, right? And so once again, you got that line, you say to yourself, I am the Eggman, they are the Eggmen. He doesn't say we are the Eggmen, does he? He never does, right? So he's like, I am the Eggman, I'm the leader, I'm the one here, and I'm the one that people look to. But it's the same with them. They look at them too. But then when they look back at me, I'm not really one of them. Even though he was best friends, right? Great friends with Paul McCartney and George Harrison and Ringo Starr, he still wasn't part of this unit. I mean, he was and he wasn't. Because you could really say the same thing with people joining organizations, right? All these things that he's saying about how other people are and groupthink and how they get lost in their group. In many ways, you look at photographs of the Beatles early on. They got the same haircut. They're wearing the same clothes. They've got the same sort of, maybe sense of humor, right? And a lot of times you could look at them, especially in the early days, if you weren't a big Beatles fans, and you wouldn't even know who the hell was who. Because even, I think they used to do that, right? During interviews, where George would say, "That's George." And then John would go, "That's John," right? And so people didn't even know. They were getting lost even on their own and losing their own identity. And so this is John's way of trying to say, look, I got my own identity. I'm the Eggman, yeah. Oh, we're all the Eggmen. Okay, you're saying we're all the Eggmen? Well, no, I'm the Walrus, right? And so you've got a little bit of that going on. And then you've got the goo-goo gajoob, goo-goo goo gajoob, goo-goo gajoob, goo-goo goo gajoob goo. And then you've got joob joob juba, juba juba juba, joob juba, joob juba. Then you've got oompa oompa, stick it up your joompa. Oompa oompa, stick it up your joompa. And then you hear, everybody's got one, everybody's got one, everybody's got one, everybody's got one, right? And so after every other line, you've got, everybody's got one, oompa oompa. Everybody's got one, stick it up your joompa. Everybody's got one, oompa oompa. Everybody's got one, stick it up your joompa, right? And people asked John Lennon, what the hell does that mean in later years? And by the way, some people thought that when you hear everybody's got one, everybody's got one, everybody's got one, some people interpreted that as, because if you listen to it, it sounds like, right, especially when, if you don't know this, then you can listen to it again after I'm done, but it sounds like people are saying, everybody smoke pot, everybody smoke pot, everybody smoke pot, everybody smoke pot. And I believe somebody said, well, what is stick it up your joompa, everybody's got one, everybody's got one, what in the world does that mean? And he's like, well, it could be in anything. We all are the same. And so we're really not all that different. And so it's an interesting thing for John Lennon to say, right? Because he didn't even realize. I don't know if he did or not. But here he writes a song about how everybody's the same. And everybody gets caught up in a whirlwind. And people just disappear. And nobody stands out. And so here he is saying that. In an interview, not even just in a song, he's sitting here admitting that, I don't even know if he realized it. I don't even know if he did. It would be so great if John Lennon was around today. And so really, he's once again saying that people aren't so different. People think the same, people act the same, and it's because so many people are the same. So that's where everybody's got one, everybody's got one, everybody's got one, everybody's got one, right? Now, what's interesting is this song, that's the end of his contribution as far as the lyrics, right? But then you got text from King Lear. And so, for example, you got this dramatic reading in the mix, right? That's Shakespeare's King Lear. It's Act 4, right? Scene 6. I think it was at lines 219 to 222 and 249 to 262. And so it was added to the song on September 29th, 1967. It was recorded directly from an AM radio that John Lennon was kind of fiddling around with it, right? And so we tuned around the dial. He settled on I think it was a 7:30 p.m. to 11 p.m. broadcast of the play on the BBC third program. By the way, people like to make fun of, the BBC, right? But you think about the type of programming it had back then and how you were able to create these, really smart people in England at the time. We were playing, this is the kind of programming they had. So I thought stuff like that's fascinating. I don't know too much about it, but the idea that from 7:30 to 11 p.m. on this particular day, they've got this dramatic reading of Shakespeare's King Lear. So I love stuff like that. But anyway, the first excerpt moves in and out of the text, right? So it contains fragments of lines only. And so it begins where the disguised Edgar, he's talking to his estranged and, maliciously blinded father, right? The Earl of Gloucester. And so Gloucester's like, now, good sir, wha, and it just starts, the word wha, the next word, Lennon had changed the channel away from the station here, and then you hear Edgar, poor man made tame by fortune, good pity. And then in the play, Edgar then kills Oswald, right? And during the fade of the song, the second main extract, this time you've got this continuous text, right? You could hear that. And so you've got Oswald, right? So you've got, slave, thou hast slain me. Villain, take my purse. If ever thou wilt thrive, bury my body, and give the letters which thou find'st about me to Edmund, Earl of Gloucester. Seek 'em out upon the British party, O untimely death. Okay? I'm not trying to be Shakespearean here, I'm just reading the lines. And then you got Edgar, I know thee well, a serviceable villain, as duteous to the ices of thy mistress, as badness would desire. All right, and you hear Gloucester, what, is he dead? And then, of course, Edgar says, sit you down, father, rest you. And so it's pretty fascinating, right? The whole idea of adding this in it. It's another example of how, I mean, my God, if the Beatles weren't, if they were ever planning to tour again, this isn't, you can't do this, right? I mean, this is like one-time sort of spontaneous works of art. But anyway, so the song structure is complex, obviously. It's unpredictable. You listen to the song for the first time, you don't know what the heck's going on. It doesn't follow a normal structure of a song, and then it's got this unpredictable stuff, right? These weird, unusual elements with the backing vocals, right? You've got this weird chorus, and then you've got this whole Shakespearean stuff. It's like, what the hell? You know, this is a pop song, right? So together, the surreal lyrics, they offer a glimpse, don't they, into John Lennon's psyche, and the unusual structure of the song. It really does create a unique and unforgettable musical experience. I mean, once you hear this song, you know this song. You could hear this song, if it's playing a mile away, you could hear this song. How many songs today can you say that about, right? So many songs sound alike. And here, way back then, here's John Lennon, right, and the Beatles, and their team, right, George Martin and the rest. And it's like they're just creating this incredible work of art that stands alone like nothing that's come before, and honestly, nothing that's really come since. And so this concludes part 1 of this episode of The Strange History of I Am the Walrus. What do you think of the song? Do you like it? Do you hate it? How do you feel when you listen to it? What images and memories do you associate with listening to this song? What do you think some of the lyrics mean? And did you ever hear the lyrics differently than what they actually turned out to be? I always think that's kind of cool. Over the course of my lifetime, when I heard a song and I thought the lyrics were one thing, and then I found out they were another, and you know what? Sometimes I liked my lyrics, how I thought they were said, better than what the actual lyrics turned out to be. But anyway, please share your comments in the thoughts below. If there are any other songs that you would like for me to discuss, please let me know. If you enjoyed this video, kindly like, share, and subscribe, and hit the notification bell here on my channel. And if you can become a member of my channel, that would be really awesome. It would help me out a lot. Also, if you want to support my research and you want to hear more shows like this, please click on the link below so you can see how you can make a donation directly to me, and also join me and your other fellow strange historians on platforms where I post exclusive content and where we get to interact further. Kindly be kind to all non-human animals, and please don't eat them. They don't like that. And please do yourself a favor and go to a local shelter and adopt a cat or a dog. You'll be very glad that you did. Until next time, I wish you safe travels on all your journeys.